Hello, and welcome to another episode of Nerds at Night. I'm nonLethal,
And I'm Tolli.
and this week we're going to be talking about video games again, surprising, but specifically like the culture of or I should say games in popular culture and video games becoming like mainstream and in the entertainment industry and a few things along those lines.
Yeah, at one point, originally, games was very much an underground thing, and it was only sort of greasy nerds who lived in their parents' basements and things like that got involved in games. But now they've leaked out into very popular culture, and I mean, nearly everyone now plays video games of some sort, if you're going to count the likes of Candy Crush Saga and all that sort of crap.
Yeah, exactly. There's always
They're not
someone
games.
doing. No, they're not games, but people seem to think they are, and they play them a lot on their smartphones. And then there's, people play online games still a lot, and I think just little bits and pieces. I'm sure there's still people who play like chess and Scrabble on their computer and whatnot.
We've got companies like Nintendo to thank for games leaking out into popular culture, I think, with things like the Wii sort of bringing gaming more to the family room, and for parents to actually get involved in gaming. It's like, here, mum, all you have to do is grab this white thing and throw it, and the ball will go down the bowling alley, and it will be amazing. Oh, why did you throw it into the TV?
Yeah, it's can be some destruction there, but that was, I think, where the big marketing for that product was, the Wii and the Wii Fit and whatever, way for lazy people to not go out of their house and just say that they're working out and getting in shape.
Also, video games are more and more becoming adapted into movies, which is probably the worst thing that we could imagine could happen based on previous experience. But there's more and more interesting titles coming to movies nowadays, and they seem like they might suck less and less. So we'll probably talk a little bit about those and some of the worst examples and some of the good examples that will hopefully be coming.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Like, there have been some video game and even board game movies and things like that have come out. Like, I remember the old Dungeons and Dragons
Don't
movie.
bring board games into this. This is a show about video games.
Look, this is a show about whatever the hell I want it to be about.
I got nothing against that. Shut up. Anyway, we'll also have a little bit of a chat about violence in video games and how there's there's some activist groups and things like that saying that because I killed the person on the screen, that when a guy looks at me strange on the street, I'm probably going to dive on top of him and start stabbing him with a knife because that's how I roll.
Because that's how video games and violent behaviour works.
Exactly. So we'll go into that, and coupled a little bit with that, video game ratings and how backwards retarded they are here in the desert that we call Australia.
Yeah, and how the government has been trying to push back on like an R18 rating for a while, and how games get rated differently here so we don't get access to all the games and things like that.
Yeah, we get a lot of games banned here because adults here aren't able to make informed choices about the kinds of video games they play. So fortunately for us, our government has pushed back on that R18 rating and prevented us from being exposed to things like potential positive effects of drugs and or aliens.
Yes, absolutely, because these things are a valid concern to the modern human.
I, for one, am thankful for our tyrannical government.
We'll also touch on the addictiveness of video games and what games do to get you suckered in and keep on coming back.
That'll be a bit of an interesting topic because I used to always think video games aren't addictive. Then I played WoW.
Yes, it is the curse that keeps on cursing.
We'll touch a little bit on some of the things that developers are employing now to keep us coming back to games, such as achievements that require you to play a game over and over again to get the platinum trophy or all of those gamer points or all the good things that you chase on your platform of choice, be it Steam, Xbone, PS4, or God knows what else they have these days. There's games on everything.
Yeah, even earlier consoles, the games themselves had them built into it. So yeah, those are all the things we'll touch on today. So where we begin?
We begin with games in popular culture.
Yes,
and how it's only been over around the last 30 years that games have even really existed, which in comparison to all of human history is a really, really short time. It's like a blink of an eye. And it seemed like almost overnight, perhaps with the as I said before, perhaps the Wii, or maybe bloody Farmville on Facebook. It seemed to happen almost overnight that games went from being this sad, depraved hobby for losers to something everyone does. They have games on their phone. They have, a lot of families have consoles, even if they aren't necessarily gaming families. Everyone plays the odd game on their PC. It leaked into popular culture seemingly almost overnight.
Yeah, I think there was a number of factors that contributed to its rise in popular culture, and you're correct in saying like tablets and gaming computers and laptops or whatever became more available. But I think also there was like a big boom in IT, and people realized that it's okay to be a nerd, quote unquote, and have these nerdy tendencies. And one of those that was highlighted was video gaming, and that was made popular by like TV shows and movies and things, and then sort of crept into the public eye. That was saying it's okay to play video games.
Well, video games have a lot of positive effects, and we won't sort of go into the propaganda of map reading skills and resource management and all the other stuff it can teach you, but simply as a relaxation tool or as a way of socially engaging with your friend. A lot of the really popular video games nowadays, like the bloody Facebook things, Farmville, Candy Crush, and all things like that, games that you play with friends, not necessarily directly, but even remotely. If you're getting your friends to send you lives on Candy Crush Saga, or even in more recent times, something like Clash of Clans, where you're actually going and doing battles with your friends, even though you may not necessarily be discussing it on a daily basis. It's really become almost a social lubricant in either the workplace or just among people's groups of friends, that you've got something else to engage with your friends with in this fun-natured kind of way, other than perhaps discussing a TV show or a movie that people have seen recently.
Yeah, exactly right. There's a lot of extra room for people to connect on that entertainment level, and whereas before, as you said, it was just you could talk about your favorite TV show or movie or whatever. Now you can talk about your favorite video game and your highest score and what achievement you're aiming for on the weekend, and how many hours you clocked in on your favorite MMO or whatever.
It's also possible that with the recent flood of indie games coming out recently, that the sheer breadth of games being released means now more than ever there are a lot more video games that cater to every possible interest out there, whereas back in the old days you'd have only a few publishers or studios releasing games really targeted at a certain demographic, and those are your teenage to middle-aged boys, really, where it was the shoot-'em-up games and things like that. And a lot of other people, a lot of potentially older people, a lot of women, and even some young teenage men aren't interested in the first-person shooters. They don't want to go out there and shoot people in the face. They want to be challenged. They want to solve puzzles. They want to get involved in interactive mysteries and things like that. And I think with the birth of the indie developer and them having many more publishing avenues to go down to get games out there to the consumer, that perhaps with a new breadth, there's more of a reason to get into gaming, because there's a lot more chance, that you'll find something that interests you.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if there's not, there's plenty of ways that people can learn to make games and like mobile apps and stuff themselves to fill a niche that they want filled for themselves. And who else in the world out there will want to have it as well.
And even if they don't specifically want to play the video games themselves, perhaps they have a PC that won't handle it, or their phone's a little bit old or the wrong brand, like if you have a crappy Windows phone like I do. Love it though. Mm-hmm. Or if you can't afford a console or something like that, a lot of these games now are coming with expanded universes, so you can get into these previously video game only universes with all their lore and things like that through other mediums. And I'll use our old dead horse Warcraft. That has comic books, manga, novels, and soon a movie coming out where you can still experience this universe and the story without having necessarily played the games if you don't have access to them or they're not really your cup of tea.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more popular recently with a lot of games where there's a tie-in to some sort of other medium. And I think we'll touch a bit more on it next week with some of their things. But things like Google released Ingress on the mobile phone, which got you used a GPS and got you walking around to do things. And Like the MMO Defiance is tied in with a TV show, that what actions you do on the game affect the TV show and vice versa. And there's also another game as well. I can't even remember the name of it, but it's got time manipulation in it. It was announced this year at E3, I think, and that's also going to have a TV show plugged into it as well.
Yeah, well, Ingress is a brilliant example of how these games can exist in a multimedia space. And as you said, we'll talk a lot more about it next week. But it's definitely a good example of how games are crossing multiple different mediums. So you can be out in the real world interacting with people. You have to actually be in geographic locations to play these games, and that gets you out socializing, working with your friends, fighting against your enemies in the real world, which gives it a new element. And as well as having these novels that you can read and all these other extended universe, games are crossing so many mediums where now a lot of these things are just becoming multifaceted universes, and the games are now just one small component of that.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's more than just sitting in your basement in your underwear playing games, eating Cheetos and drinking Red Bull. It's like
that is the best way to experience them, though.
It's among it, yeah. But also, like, getting, as you said, getting out there into the real world to, like, geotag yourself at a location to get a bonus in game, or go and interact with the other people who play the game to get a buff or something to that effect. Like, find out some more lore that will help you out by reading one of the books or watching a movie or something.
Precisely. And we'll get into that now. We'll move off the general topic of games in popular culture. A lot of video games are getting movie components now, and I can hear the collective sigh of our listeners thinking back on some of the woeful games that have become woeful movies, and good games that have become woeful movies, and amazing games that have become woeful movies. And you'll notice the pattern here. Every time they do this conversion, it just doesn't seem to work. And I'm not sure anyone, at least in the movie industry, has really figured out why this isn't happening. I know some notable examples. Mortal Kombat, which was tripe, in my opinion. Hitman, even Tomb Raider.
Also tripe.
Yeah, I mean, they were all fairly terrible. And it's a shame because those games were great. They were good games. And as they've been adapted to movies, they've lost something. And I don't think it's just the interactivity. It seems as though the people writing these scripts don't perhaps have a full appreciation for the source material.
Yeah, that may be true. Like, you can imagine some of the big wigs in Hollywood of people who have all these flash cars and lots of money who want to get these movies made so they can make a buck off these poor imbeciles who are off playing these video games. And in that disconnect, they've made something which just gamers aren't really interested in.
In fairness, those movies probably still made a fortune, because let's face it, gamers are stupid enough to buy DLC so we can have a different costume for a character in a game. And if we'll fork out $5 for that, we'll pay $20 to go and see a movie about a game that we liked, even if we already know that it's gonna suck.
Yeah, that's probably true. Let's be fair.
Us gamers are just... God, we're retarded.
Yeah, geez, we're just retarded.
But anyway, there are new ones coming out soon, and you know, there's a dead horse coming to a screen near you, World of Warcraft, which I think they're just going to call it Warcraft, but anyway, titles are relevant. They're doing a reboot of the Hitman movie. They're doing, I believe, a God of War movie. I know that's been tossed around, but I think that's becoming pretty serious now. And there are a lot of these coming that now are huge name titles with massive stories, but I think the difference with a lot of these ones is that the original creators are getting involved in the screenplays, so they've got a chance to be halfway decent, which could be pretty exciting if we start seeing this type of thing become something that gamers actually want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, as you said, if they've got some of the creators of the material in there helping out with the process, then it should really be more a video game that happens to be a movie, and you can experience the film and, well, the game itself in film format from the eyes of the protagonist and relate to them, and as they go through their journey, it would be really, really exciting.
Well, you can tell amazing stories through that medium because you don't have to craft it in a way that every player feels like they're the savior of the universe. You can craft a very narrow narrative where you tell a particular part of the lore that you want to express in a certain way and not necessarily have players screw around with, as players can sometimes do when they're experiencing the lore for themselves. That gives them a new avenue of telling a story. I understand there's a lot of difficulties, like when you've got pre-existing characters that look a certain way and you're trying to cast actors into that role. It's often hard to find someone who meets that exact same physique, and you're trying to get the voice as close as you can. So you can imagine like Dwayne Johnson trying to play Kratos. You know, he might have the physique for that, but does he have the voice? Would he be able to pull off Kratos' angst from God of War?
It'd be doubtful. It's something he would put effort into, but yeah, he's also not, and this is going to be quite controversial, the corporate colour for Kratos.
Agreed. He'd need quite a lot of body paint to be the ghost of Sparta, that's for damn sure.
Yeah.
But I think something like in Warcraft, they've got a better chance. They're telling a historical story with a lot of characters that don't necessarily have a very solidly defined appearance. I know the Warcraft creators have been known to retcon some appearances, even in World of Warcraft itself, as they update models. It's like, hey, that character didn't look like that a month ago. So I think they've got more of a chance because they've got a bit more of a fluid background, so they can change things up a little bit to try and get characters where they want them to be. And because they're telling a historical story, a lot of the screenplay can already be written because the information's already there. They just need to now get that into a format that they can express it through film.
Yeah, get into a working script, as you said, because all that lore, all that backstory is already there. It's already been told, and gamers from that universe will know that story, and so they'll be excited to see what they already have read about being brought to the screen.
Yeah, I'd love to go along and see something that I've read about through tidbits in the game or through the novels, and just see that come to life before my eyes on a movie screen. I think that is where that genre has a lot of value for video games if they want to go that way. I don't think it's any good retelling a story that has already been a video game, because if it's not interactive, it's not going to be any fun. And I think that was part of the problem with Hitman, is they tried to tell a little bit of his origins. They tried to generify it as much as usual, and it's like, hey, that didn't happen. That's not how I played through that bit. So they're trying to retcon it for the movie universe, and I'm sure there are some reasons for that, and they need to attract new people to come and see it, people who haven't played the games, but they seem to just take it a little bit too far.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I mean, you can sort of understand from their perspective it'd be difficult to make it exactly like the game, especially in a situation like Hitman, because it was a very open world sort of thing, so there was multiple ways to go down different pathways. And sure, you can get like the cornerstones, the crux of the story down pat, but then it's filling in the gaps, which you're never going to please everyone. You just have to make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, that's part of the problem when you're playing a character and you're investing in that character. Some of the bits that are missing in their backstory, you tend to start filling in yourself in your head. So when you see those things laid out before you, especially in a different medium such as film, you tend to start to get a little bit defensive and be like, hey, that's not how I imagine that part of the story happening. I know that, he was a test tube baby and he was, number 47 and all this sort of stuff, and that he broke out, but I didn't see it in my head happening exactly like that. They've retconned this. This is bullshit. And you can get a lot of defense from gamers who have invested a lot of time into 5 games in the series now and have spent a lot of time with Agent 47 when they're trying to introduce him on the big screen as a brand new character that you've never met before.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be very hard to get over the bias of some gamers in that aspect. All right, Tolli, let me ask you a question. Out of the video games that we have out there that have not yet become a movie, do you have like 1 or 2 games you'd like to see made into a movie?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I'm pretty excited for God of War. I know that's already a thing, but I think they could take some of the more arty games, for lack of a better word. So things like Shadow of the Colossus, perhaps Journey, could make some really amazing films if done with the right cinematography. I think they could turn that into an experience that I would genuinely be pleasured to watch. Journey, only in the sense that they could do that. There would be something that you could do as, say, a film festival movie that's perhaps only 30 minutes long. I think they could do a lot of really interesting cinematography and interaction with that. And for Shadow of the Colossus, I mean, it would just be badass to see that done in almost a Pacific Rim style with, this little dude battling these enormous colossi.
Yeah, that would be pretty sweet. I'd watch Shadow of the Colossus, the movie.
Hell yeah. I would watch the shit out of that. Especially if they had like all the CGI they could do now, and it's just these enormous colossi going down to this dude.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sweet. Well, one game universe, I should say, that really sort of leaps out to me, it'd be good as a film or as a trilogy 1v to the sort of the major games, would be Deus Ex. Now, I've loved this series of games for a long time, and the latest one, Human Revolution, just really, it made it much more real, and sort of, even because the graphics were so good in the last one when it came out, and I could really see it translating to a film and going through the three sort of different phases through the game. Like, the games aren't in chronological order, but the movies could be, and it could just be beautiful. It'd be sort of like Blade Runner 2.0 almost, but also crossed with iRobot sort of thing.
I can see that. I think that would be an interesting premise to try and bring to the screen, and something that they could definitely do and perhaps even expand on a little bit. Not having played the games, I possibly see a little bit more potential in it, because I wouldn't be going into that movie with any personal prejudices, so perhaps I'd be a bit more open to it.
Yeah, basically it'd be just humankind going into advanced robotics and coming to grips with, human augmentation and whether it's right or wrong, and the downfall of humanity, sort of.
How would human augmentation ever be wrong?
Well, that's what the game series goes into.
Well, it's not a question. It's life is the question and beer is the answer. It's just like, human augmentation will always be a good thing.
I agree, but this game brings up some very valid and very interesting arguments.
Give me one.
When you start augmenting people to be like, for example, when police and military start becoming like super, ultra robot super soldiers, when criminals can also do the same thing, and they can hack into banks and stuff from their robotic arm, things start escalating. There's criminals these days are always finding ways to get around the safeguards and break through securities now. Imagine how it's going to be like when there's like big giant neural nets and frickin' explosives everywhere, and gotta be like Judge Dredd.
I can live with that. That would be fantastic, to just have these judges riding around on bikes and it's just be like, you have committed piracy. We found a downloaded computer on your movie. I sentence you to death. Blam!
Did you just say you found a downloaded computer on your movie?
Yes. Yes, I did.
This is why you don't do drugs, folks.
Yeah, don't ever just... Nah, look, I can't admit to anything I've been doing before the show, but you have to be appropriately prepared before you do a podcast. That's
true. Prepared is a very open-ended term. Right, so this is sort of segueing nicely into a violent sort of area, and so that brings us nicely into talking about violence in video games.
Violence is always good.
I like violence in video games. It has to be a good, appropriate level of violence for the setting and the type of game, but I do not think it makes me want to go out and murder people, for example.
It's a timeless argument, I think, that will always be there with video games, as it possibly always is with TV. If you let your kids watch those horror movies, then they'll end up wanting to, trap each other in rooms with sticky tape for toilet paper and, torture each other and things like that. It will always happen with video games that there will be some people that claim violence in the games will make you more violent. As a gamer myself, I would say that's mostly not true. If it does happen, and it can, typically that individual would have to be predisposed to violence already. However, you have to consider that if they weren't taking that out in the video game, I come home after a bad day sometimes and I just want to get in Titanfall, which we'll mention our stream of later, and just shoot people in the face, and that makes me feel better. It's like I'll just go around snapping people's necks with melee kills, and I'll just be like, life is good again. And perhaps if I didn't have that release, I would instead go out into the street and punch someone in the face, and then, find myself up on charges for assault or things like that. So without already being predisposed to that violence, video games and the violence you can commit in them should be considered more of an outlet than an encouragement to try this stuff in real life.
I completely agree. Like, my opinion is violence in video games causes violence in real life, just like people watching porn causes you to be better at sex and that sort of
It
stupid
does. Are you claiming that it doesn't?
It gives you an unrealistic expectation of sex, but that's not what we're talking about.
We can talk about this for hours.
Yeah, we could. But you can sort of get what I'm coming to.
Well, that's an argument that's been made. It's like playing Cooking Mama doesn't make me a chef. Playing Surgeon Simulator does not make me a doctor. And playing Grand Theft Auto does not make me a car thief.
Exactly. That's the point I'm wanting to make. Just because you enjoy and watch these type of games and like playing them doesn't mean you will become that type of person. As you mentioned so eloquently, it's an outlet for a lot of people, and unless you have the type of personality and the predisposition to that sort of behavior already in real life, it may act as a heightening factor for those already existing emotions and troubles, but it won't, I believe, be a catalyst on its own to drive people to that sort of behavior.
There is a singular crucial exception that we have to note here. Being able to play through Fire and Flames on Expert does make me a hella wicked guitarist.
If you say so, sir.
It's a true fact.
You should play it on Rocksmith if they have it on Rocksmith.
I was going to say Rocksmith is actually one of the games where it can help you with real life skills. But anyway, that doesn't help prove our point that shooting people in the face in the game does not make me want to... Well, I do want to shoot people in the face in real life, but it doesn't give me the necessary skills to be able to acquire and operate a gun to be able to shoot people in the face in real life. So I just go home and do it in games.
That's right. Like, just because you want to doesn't mean you will, and as you said, there are ways to...
Oh, I will. The day is coming.
For reckoning.
Duly noted. But just because there's a desire doesn't mean there's a means, and doesn't mean you're going to. Conspiracy, or not even conspiracy, desire to commit a crime doesn't mean you're going to or can be guilty found of committing a crime.
Well, that's like the trifecta of crime, isn't it? There has to be, intent, means, and opportunity, right? Or something of that nature. So, yeah, as you said, just because you want to doesn't mean you will, and just because you can in video games doesn't mean you will in real life. I've sat there and I'm just like, I've seen this happen in GTA. I could walk over to that dude's car and just jack him right now. However, being a sensible adult human being, instead of doing that, I start doing a podcast about video games.
That's true, and this is our outlet for not wanting to punch strangers in the street.
That's right. Before this, I saw a jerk walking past my house. It's like, I'm going to kill that guy. And then it's like, you know what? Instead, I'm going to record a podcast about how violence in video games doesn't make me a violent person. I'm just an asshole by default.
Yeah, this is true. I can't argue with that.
Why do you hurt me? You could have defended me then.
I could have. You're right.
So the problem with violence in video games is that we have rating systems. And often the argument used is that kids get their hands on these super violent video games. These little 12-year-olds play the R18 games where you asphyxiate someone and then teabag their corpse and things like this. And this is a bad thing because kids are young and impressionable and parents are useless and don't monitor what their children do. So here, in this particular country, known as Australia, we've decided at some point in the past that we wouldn't have an R18. We would just go up to MA15+, which means you need to present ID showing that you're at least 15 years old to be able to purchase this game. And any game that will not fit into this category, i.e. some of the GTA games, even stuff like South Park's Stick of Truth, will get refused classification and essentially then be banned in this country until they are modified to suit our pussy police stating nanny ways.
Yeah, and the South Park Stick of Truth one's a good example because there were some scenes in there which were refused by the Australian government, the classification board, and so they had to make a custom screen with a crying koala saying basically that Australia are a bunch of pussies and can't see this part of the game.
The thing that makes that amazing though is that at some point in the last year and a half or so, we did get an R18 rating. Us gamers rose up and overthrew the government and they decided to cave on this tiny little issue that they could care less about. And they gave us an R18 rating. And all was good in the world because we could have adults-only video games. Unfortunately, our classification board still decides that some depictions of actions and their consequences in games are still unacceptable to be classified even R18 in this country. So what happens in especially some survival zombie games that have been released here, or have tried to be released here, that if you take a drug, an actual prescription drug, or something like marijuana, cocaine, anything like that, if you take that and it gives you a positive benefit in the game, if it busts you with, plus 10 munchies or something like that, then that is refused classification here because it promotes the use of drugs in their eyes. So even with that R18 rating, we still don't get to play it.
Look, and I've got two sides to this, and you're probably going to chew me out over this massively, but hear me out. I am very, very glad we have an R18 rating now. It'll allow us to get more games into the country that we couldn't before, and I truly believe that games will go the way of movies, where back in the day, like M15 movies today used to be like R18 or even X-rated movies back in the day. Like, they're just becoming more and more accepted of more extreme things, and I think games will go the same way, and so they'll just be rated lower and lower as time goes on. Having said that, just because we have an R18 rating, and this is the controversial bit, doesn't mean everything should be allowed. It still has to go within a certain guideline. Just like R-rated movies are not X-rated movies. Like, you can't just put all porn X-rated movies into the R18 section. They have to have their own above board section. The same thing should be with games. If it is way too extreme, it needs to not be R18, and that's my Nana moment.
That's not entirely unacceptable, despite the fact that you're wrong and you should kill yourself. But the problem with that is the classification board seems to have this really ambiguous line as to what is deemed to be above even R18. I'm an adult. I know that most drugs will not be good for me. But they're ruling out on even things like taking a prescription drug, which I can get from my doctor, which will help me with my arthritis or whatever. If I take that in the game and it gives me a buff or replaces some of my health, they still won't let me have that because they will claim that it promotes the abuse of prescription drugs. It's the apocalypse. If I want to take some morphine to feel better, I'm gonna do it. I don't understand that when you've got a situation where there's clear suspension of disbelief in order to buy into this universe, that the message you're going to take away from the hordes of zombies and being able to single-handedly take on 1,000 zombies with 2 chainsaws tied to the end of a pole, I'm going to take away from that, hey, every time I don't feel well, I should get me a syringe of morphine, and then I'll be able to have superhuman powers.
Yeah, I do see your point, and it is very hand-holdy of the government, but like I said, I view the R18 rating as a victory because, exactly like I said before, games will be able to be rated more and more, and we'll have more access to games, and as more games go into this new rating system, the ratings will become, I believe, more lax, just like movies have over the years, and these games will eventually, this level of game that they're now refusing will get classified, and it'll just, as more young people now who are okay with these games and okay with knowing the difference in good and bad drug use, etc., get old enough to get on the classification board themselves, those things will be allowed in. So it's just, I believe it's a generational and just a time. It's purely time until we have won this war.
I think you're taking an optimistic approach. Being a pessimist myself, I don't think that's necessarily true, as I continue to see this country go more and more backwards. Where's our NBN? However, I will temper that by saying that I'm a part of a research group that the Australian Classification Board has reached out and created with people who are lovers of various genres of media and are actively taking feedback about the way they make classifications, not only on games, but across the board. And they've contacted me personally at least 3 or 4 times so far, with surveys about how I feel about classifications and what I think they could do to improve the information they're putting out about how they classify things and stuff like that. And it does seem like they're taking that feedback on board, regardless of whether they're taking any action based on the information they're getting. But that is the only promising sign I see. I think there is still room for that R18 rating to get repealed and for us to descend back into the dark ages of video games. And I have concern for that day, as we have some conservative politicians try and fight against the evil that is video games. But I haven't abandoned all hope.
Abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
Yes, this country. Abandon all hope for fast internet and good games.
Yeah, and I do see your point, and there, as you said, in some areas of life we've been going backwards, but that's like a problem with our country and or our government, and more specifically the voting public. But it doesn't really change the fact that I think once people get sick of this nana hand-holding government, then we'll get in more open-minded people, and these things can come in to stay.
Well, perhaps that's true, where as the public grows more accepting of video games as they enter popular culture more and more, perhaps we'll see some of these conservative individuals who are against video games as a whole start to broaden their mindset and perhaps see that, okay, there is a place for these violent video games that these 30-something gamers want to play. Sorry, these 30-something-year-old gamers, not just 30 people, want to play, and perhaps they'll see that as those people's choice. If you want to go home and you want to play Manhunt, where you sneak up on people and choke them with plastic bags and stuff like that, that is your choice as an adult. The same way as it's your choice if you want to go out and stab someone in the face in real life. There are consequences. There will always be consequences for how you spend your time, whether it's playing a video game or stabbing people in the face and going to prison. And I think we may move to a stage where people will just accept those choices of others, but it may be a more general thing, not necessarily just for video games.
Yeah, and I think one thing that needs to change here to make this a reality is basically the people who are ruining it for everyone trying to do the right thing. And I say that it applies to video games, drinking and smoking and other things like that, is bad or stupid parents or older siblings or whatever who buy these things for younger people who can't buy them themselves.
Well, that's right. The thing that really gets me about it is that we have all of these restrictions in place to protect the more vulnerable people of the public who might be influenced by these things or may have predispositions to be affected by them. And other people in the community seem to be circumventing it every corner. And I see it every day, and I'll try and keep this confined to video games so we don't wind up on a tangent that I could rant on for an hour, is that there are parents walking to EB Games. It's like, oh, my son wants Call of Duty for his 12th birthday. And I understand that in some respects. I played Call of Duty when I'm 13. I'm not stabbing people in the face today. I'm not saying I don't want to, but I don't do it. However, these parents may not necessarily be understanding the content of the game and what their children are going to be exposed to when they're playing it, especially if there isn't supervision when that's happening. Now, this perhaps isn't so bad with the console generation because kids are usually doing this out in the living room and parents are watching what their kids are doing. And, perhaps just adding little comments, this isn't real life. If you ever do get your hands on an AK and you're confronted by a terrorist, call the police. Don't just shoot him in the junk. So that may not be so bad because of the console generation, but it's really just having knowledge of the content that you're purchasing.
Yeah, and what bugs me about it is that causes a problem in itself with the impressionable youth, as you've mentioned, but also whenever there's a story in the news or any other type of popular media that villainizes video games, they always point out these kids playing these terrible, terrible games, and this is why we need to stop those games. And no, it's not the game's fault the kid is playing that game. It's their stupid parents or whoever bought them that game's fault. The game itself is fine if the person playing it is within the age bracket and is allowed to play that game, but it's the people allowing these kids to play these games that are outside of their range and that they shouldn't be playing that are to blame, not the games themselves.
Even if you are going to circumvent those rules, just make sure your kid that's playing this has a grounding in reality. As long as they can firmly tell the difference between the game and the real world, you're not going to run into a problem. Your kid isn't going to go to school with a gun and start trying to shoot up the place, as long as they understand that the game stops when the console gets turned off. And a lot of kids are like that, and perhaps this will go away as the current generation grow up and have kids of their own. They're going to monitor this, and I see this even now with some people I know at work. They're monitoring very carefully the games that their kids play, and sometimes they let them play games that are a little bit out of their bracket, but after a warning that they know that the silliness and the violence stops as soon as the console goes off. You don't try and hit people in real life, and, just generally do some parenting.
Yeah, and that's a very, very perfectly valid point. And like gaming with parents and their kids is becoming more and more an accepted and even a good thing. Like I've got some friends that have had kids, and the father will sit down and play a game himself, and when the kids are very young and don't really know what's going on, I just give them a controller which isn't plugged in, so they think they're playing, and they like bond over video games. So as you said, as long as it's done correctly and that they know it's a game, there's no harm, no foul.
Yeah, precisely. And I think it's perhaps not necessarily fair to put all of the blame on parents. I know there are other burdens of responsibility on different parts of the community, but I think it's a good place to start, is to just say, when we introduce our kids to video games, and, perhaps we just call this generation a write-off. The people out there now plotting the murder that they, did in a game in real life, that guy's done for. Let the police get that guy and deal with him. But we can make things better for the new upcoming generations. Let's help teach kids the difference between games and real life, and let's make sure that they're playing content appropriate for their level of maturity, and we can avoid some of these things in future. We're not going to have 10-year-olds trying to carjack a taxi when they know that that's wrong. Yeah,
and you made a very solid point there as well. It's not an age bracket, it's a maturity level, and that's really what the buck stops at. We can make sure that they are playing games for their maturity level, that they know it's a game, not real life, and then we can let them go off and get addicted to the games on their own.
Good point. And we will touch on this now just a little bit before we end the show. You said the word addict.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you said a different word. I don't know. I wasn't listening. I was on my phone.
I wasn't confessing to being an addict. I'm not ready for that yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I know I have a problem, but I function, so whatever.
This is what the intervention was going to be about, but okay.
Dang it.
We'll shift topics again. Video game addictiveness as a whole is something that's often tied to this violence in video games and parenting, and kids that end up killing themselves because they played StarCraft for 40 hours straight and things like that. I'll just ask you this question straight out. Do you think video games are addictive?
I believe that certain video games can be addictive for certain people.
That was the most uncommitted statement you've ever made on this show, you swine bucket.
Well, I can't just say, yes, video games are addictive, because that could be quoted as all video games are addictive for all people.
Yes, this is true.
People who already have addictive personalities and get into games which reward minor progressions and things like that can get addicted to games.
Just terrible.
Well, what about you, swine?
Shut up. You don't get to be involved in this whole segment now.
Go on then, you talk.
Video games, I don't think, are necessarily addictive on their own. I think they can play on certain other characteristics that are addictive, so it can provide rewards for people who dedicate time to things, and I don't think that's necessarily related to video games. I know it can happen with video games, but it certainly seems to only happen to people who might be predisposed to this sort of thing, and it just so happens that they've aimed this at video games. They might have perhaps in a different genre pointed at something else and ended up being a movie buff or something like that, but it only seems to come with the negative connotations of addiction when that person happens to be sitting next to a video game. If they're addicted to watching movies, it's just like, oh, they're a movie buff. Or if they're addicted to going on the internet, it's like, oh, they're just well informed because they spend all day on Wikipedia. It only seems to be demonized near video games. So I would lean towards saying the blanket statement that no, they're not addictive, in the same way that they're not perhaps like cigarettes where a chemical is being craved. I know the whole dopamine argument, but that's true of sex and anything else like that. So I would tend towards the statement that no, they're not.
Well, that's a fair point. That's sort of what I was getting at in people with addictive personalities who get that dopamine rush from their addiction of choice. It means that they can get addicted to video games, but they can also get addicted to any number of things. It's not limited to video games. It's whatever gives them that rush that they seek out. And there are people who it's video games. There are people who it's cigarettes. There are people who it's drinking and so many other things.
Well, you could just as easily get addicted to playing tennis.
Yeah, exactly right. You can get addicted to line dancing.
dear Jesus, tell me there aren't people like that.
I don't know. I don't line dance.
Are you sure?
I said I wasn't ready to admit my addiction.
I was going to say, this is a safe space. Everyone here loves you, nonLethal. You can feel like, I want you to feel like you can tell us anything in this massive public online forum.
No one here loves me, especially you.
I'm the one who hates you the most of all the people you have met in your life so far and your life yet to be.
That's a depressing statement.
You're welcome. Anyway, something that is, however, tending people towards addictiveness, or at least excessive playing, is the popularization of achievements. People seem to be playing games more and more now because they want these achievements. They're going after gamer scores and platinum trophies and things like that. I don't know whether that is starting to lead people towards addiction who may not have had it before, because they're becoming completionists when they may not have been before, because they're competing with friends over these trophy points and stuff like that. Do you think that's really adding to the quote-unquote addictiveness of video games?
I think it certainly can play a part in it, and it's a two-edged sword, or a two-sided coin, I should say, because it does make people play games more, and so it can get people not necessarily addicted to the game, but addicted to these minor achievements and these little vanity upgrades and these platinum trophies or whatever in their competitive nature. But also, video game companies are making games with these achievements in them, so they're making games to be played more, which makes sense because they want to make money, because they want people to keep playing their games. But it's not necessarily good for people, quote-unquote good, to be playing more of these games and pouring time into these quote-unquote useless achievements.
I mean, they do have a tangible benefit in game, in the sense that you'll drop maybe $120 on a video game, and by having these achievements, it is giving you a reason to go back to the universe and try some of the harder parts of the game and try and be better at it. So it is extending gameplay, even if only in a kind of arbitrary way. So I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. It is a pretty serious concern, some of the people who spend absolute massive throngs of time trying to get these things when, it may be something that's based almost entirely on luck. So I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing. But I feel that achievements as a whole do add a new layer of depth to games and that social element that we were discussing before.
Yeah, and it also gives certain types of gamers something to shoot for in the game. Like, let's go back to our dead horse, World of Warcraft. They added achievements in, and it allowed people who maybe even more casual gamers who didn't want to get into the big high-end raiding or anything like that. It gave them things to chase after and shoot for that can give them a sense of fulfillment in the game. Instead of downing the final boss in a raid, they can get the final level in an achievement and unlock a shiny new horse or something like that.
That's an excellent point. It really does add just that extra layer of depth for gamers that perhaps want to play a game slightly differently. If they don't want to rush through the story or play the multiplayer, it gives them something to do. It comes down to something we've been saying all night. It's the person involved that's playing video games. And I don't think just because they happen to be sitting next to a video game at the time that it's necessarily a systemic issue with the industry. I think it's just going through this baby phase, like I'm sure TV and movies did, and art seems to go through every 10 years or so. I think it really just comes down to the person. These games aren't inherently good or evil. They're not taking good people and turning them into murderers or addicts or anything like that. It's just a new art form, a way to enjoy yourself, have some entertainment, and the fact they're becoming mainstream now is just great, and it's going to bring it to more people than ever before.
I agree completely. It is, as games become more into popular culture and become more in the public eye, people will become more accepting of not only games but game ratings, and it won't be seen as an addiction if someone's going chasing to get level 600 fishing or whatever it is in their game they're doing, and it's a way to connect with people socially and share their gamer score across with their friends, or say, hey, how'd you go getting that platinum trophy on the weekend? I got it last night. And as it becomes more into popular culture and more accepted by people, it'll smooth out along the edges, as you said, just like all the other mediums of entertainment have done over the years.
So we can agree, games are great and there is no way that they could possibly be evil.
Yes.
I hate agreeing with you. Moving on, because we're going to start wrapping this show up, we have some really exciting news this week, and it's that you can now watch us suck at Titanfall.
That is right. We played Titanfall, and we were unsurprisingly terrible.
Yes, we were. And after multiple attempts at trying to get the bloody thing online, we've finally done it. So if you head over to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/something. I don't know what it is. You'll have to Google it, but we'll mention it in the episode and I'll pop it in the description for this podcast. It'll be up on the website and about 1,000 other places. So find it in our Twitter or whatever, and you can watch us suck. We've only put up part 1 so far, but part 2 and 3 are coming, and you can watch us be really bad and try and do some lousy impressions and just generally have a good time playing games.
Yeah, we've got some other games that we've been recording lately that are going to be coming up either now or in the near future. I've already got 2 games up there, a series for Civilization 5, Brave New World, and for XCOM Enemy Within. We're also planning a few other secret surprises coming up in the near future and some more old school things which we'll be doing as well. So if you want to get involved in those, you can get in touch with us on our Twitter, which is twitter.com/nerdsatnight, on Facebook /nerdsatnight community, or just on our website www.nerdsatnight, and get in touch and get involved.
Yeah, that's right. Just get in touch with us any way you can, be a part of the community, play games with us, and then we can all be gamers together, and then when one of us does something violent, the media will come down on us like a ton of bricks.
That's right. Let's ruin the community for the rest of the group by being violent. Now, before I go on, I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. If anyone is living in Australia, specifically in Melbourne, specifically in the southeastern Bayside area, and you love video games, you should go to www.versus.com.au and check it out. It's a gym I've been going to recently, which is very gamified. You get points for all the exercises you do, and you get paired with someone else to beat their score, and it's really competitive, and it's made me the sexy, ripped, beautiful man I am today.
He's not actually that attractive, but that's not the gym's fault. And having never been, I endorse this product and or service. So if you are in that area, you should really go and check it out.
It's really good fun and it's worth it. Check it out.
In the meantime, I've been Tolli.
And I'm nonLethal.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.